discussing the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the business world. Now on BBC World News, Aaron Heselhurst presents this week's edition of Talking Business.
Hey, hello everybody, a very warm welcome to Talking Business Weekly with me, Aaron Heselhurst. Let's go and take a look at what's on the show. The death of George Floyd has become a rallying cry for the Black Lives Matter movement, with tens of thousands taking to the streets in protest. Business across the world have signalled their support for the movement. From Amazon to Apple, big business is certainly speaking out about the treatment of black people. But beyond the rhetoric of support, many are asking if these titans of industry could be doing more. We'll be joined by these two business leaders to discuss how this far-reaching issue can be tackled. Hey, wherever you are watching in the world, a big hello from me to all of you. Let's get cracking, because America's unhappy history of race relations has once again spilled out into the streets and certainly into the headlines. Now, the unrest sparked by the death of the African-American George Floyd whilst being detained by police in Minneapolis has certainly convulsed the nation, in fact, pretty much the world. The widespread protests and clashes between demonstrators and police have once again highlighted one of the fundamental questions facing the world's biggest economy. How can it guarantee equality for all its citizens? Now, there is a big hill to climb, let me tell you, because according to the US Census back in 2018, median black households earn 41% less than median white households. I will say that doesn't mean African Americans don't have any economic muscle. They do. Last year, their spending power in that country was this. It topped $1.4 trillion. Now, companies like Starbucks and Amazon, they're lining up to condemn racism and police brutality, with some like, well, General Motors and McDonald's promising to take steps to improve inclusion. Right now, though, only four of America's 500 biggest companies are led by African Americans. I will tell you, the picture here ain't much better either. Just over 3% of top-level officers at top UK firms are from an ethnic minority. In a moment, we're going to be discussing the issue with, as I said, two top business leaders. But first, let's just get some of the thoughts of those who have been protesting.
There's no reason that we're in modern day times and still have the mentalities rooted in slavery.
This isn't something that just started today. This is something that has happened generations ago.
People are saying that it looks like civil rights movement. It's because it is. It's because it never went away. Because if it wasn't blatant slavery, it was institutional slavery.
I think it's important that we get our voices heard in like a peaceful way and show them that there's injustice that's happening.
As long as I can remember, there has been a systematic inequality in this country. I can only attest to what I know. I can attest to being profiled. I can attest to being a marginalized person. And if we don't speak up against injustice anywhere, then no one will speak up against it.
Okay, let's get more, because joining us from Chicago is Dr. Erin Thomas, Head of Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging at the Upwork. Now, the Upwork, that's the world's largest freelancing platform with clients including Airbnb, GE and Microsoft. As well, I'm joined right here from London, Adjoa Adjei-Twum, founder and CEO of Emerging Business Intelligence and Innovation Group. Actually, her company works with Oxford University to promote African economic development. Adjoa and Erin, a real pleasure having you with us. Thanks so much for joining us. A question briefly just for both of you, and Erin, we'll start with you in Chicago. We've seen unlawful killings of black Americans by police and law enforcement. We've seen this for decades, and yes, we've seen protests off the back of that. But nothing like this. Can you help us explain, certainly to our global audience, what's been the difference this time?
Thanks, Aaron. What a great question. I think the difference this time is the fact that this is an acute race crisis on top of a global pandemic. And so folks were already tired, exhausted, overwhelmed, feeling uncertain. And for this to happen on the backdrop of this global coronavirus pandemic, enough was enough. I think it was the sort of boiling point at which capacity for anything that felt unjust or inequitable really came to a boil. And so folks are ready to demand action because in the midst of all of this uncertainty, we need something to grasp onto right now. So I'm really pleased by the amount of outcry. And also we need companies to step up, not just with protesting and not just with statements, with real action plans that are steeped in commitment to uprooting any sort of discrimination or racism that exists within their own organizations.
Yeah, and Adjoa, do you echo those sentiments?
I completely agree. Like she said, we've just come out of we're still coming out of a big pandemic. And a lot of people are very frustrated. And especially if you look at the figures of those who died in this pandemic, have been mainly Black people. In the US, a lot of the African Americans, they've lost their loved ones. And even here in the UK, it's been a lot of Black people. So like she rightly said, people are tired, frustrated. They're looking for some kind of hope. A lot have lost their jobs. So there's a lot of uncertainty. And to, once they started to ease down the lockdown, to be faced with such brutality, I think, yes, enough is enough, echoing what she just said.
And Adjoa, just off the back of your comments, do you think this crisis, the virus crisis, has lifted the veil on the health inequalities, the economic inequalities where Black Americans, Black English people have been at the front line? They've been doing their jobs at the front line, which we've all been certainly relying on.
Absolutely. I completely agree that this COVID-19 has pretty much unveiled all the inequalities. If you look at those that work on the front line, a lot of them happen to be Black people. If I look at the nursing, you find a lot of Black people. If you're looking at even the retail, the low-paid jobs who are in the front line, it's a lot of Black people. The same I would say similar to even the US as well. So I think definitely there is inequality, and the COVID-19 has just pretty much opened up this level of inequality. I believe that the COVID-19 situation and also the violence that is happening are only symptoms of a bigger problem. And for a long time, the world has required a table that is big enough and inclusive enough to hear everybody's voice, and with leaders who have the ability to listen to these voices. And the issue, if this is not resolved, it can only get worse.
Yeah, indeed. Erin, can I come to you, because your role is to help corporate America, to help companies tackle inequalities. But when you look at the numbers, it feels like we have such a long way to go. As I said at the top of the program, only 4 out of the top 500 American companies are run by African Americans.
That's right. You know, this isn't just inequity that exists out there outside of the workplace, especially here in the US. The very founding of this country is steeped in the fabric of racism and oppression. And so for any company to assume or pretend that that hasn't trickled into the design of their organizations, or that their organizations haven't perpetuated systemic inequities and racism would be really foolish. You know, I think it's really important that we stop watering down corporate diversity and inclusion efforts. And in this particular, moment, recognize the fact that we have to build and cultivate anti-racist companies. That requires action, it requires discomfort, it requires momentum. And if we water things down or become colorblind, Black folks are going to continue to be left behind. We can't talk broadly about people of color. We can't talk broadly about inclusion, because when we do that, the research shows that the folks who tend to benefit most are white women. So we can't stop short. We have to really center Black employees in this moment, understand what it is that's holding them back within our own organizations, and design and devise data-driven solutions so that we're removing the barriers to people's success.
And Joe, can I ask you this? I mentioned we've heard a lot of lip service from huge titans around the world, corporate titans, household names. But it has to be a case, surely, not just to talk. You've got to be able to walk the talk.
Yes, absolutely. So if I give you some bit of perspective from where I sit, a lot of the work that I've done in the corporate world has been around the whole corruption, financial crime. And unfortunately, we live in a world of economic unfairness, and the bias is against Africans. The perception allows for a certain disadvantage from the West when it comes to doing business with Africans. Africa is perceived very corrupt. and also very high risk. And of course, when investors are going to Africa or investing in African businesses, when they think of high risk, they think of high return. So it's a lot of unfairness, even when it comes to interest being paid back. And the corruption has the perception. I understand that we have a lot of issues when it comes to corruption, but I think a lot of the perception has been viewed, Africa has been viewed from a homogeneous lenses. And so that's been a huge danger. Now, in terms of a big corporation paying lip services, I think that some are paying lip services, but you also have the likes of Bank of America this week has announced $1 billion, a 4-year commitment of additional support to helping the local communities address economic and racial inequality, and that's mainly in the US. So I think there are companies that are stepping up, and the time is now. And I believe that as a lot of these large organizations step up, you will have other ones following suit. I'd also believe that the smaller and mid-sized organizations, I believe everyone is actually having this conversation now, and things are about to change.
Yeah, well, that's great. Erin, do you think these corporate titans, these giants, actually have the power? Do they have the power, the ability, the will to make differences for Black Americans?
Absolutely. If you look at the footprint of big corps, you know, in terms of customers they serve, in terms of sheer number of people that they employ, their movements in and of themselves. And there's so much data, so much research, some conducted by myself during those research days, that really shows exactly what the pain points tend to be within any organization. So many great consultancies that can help companies identify where exactly is it in your talent processes that we see, you know, myopic views of what excellence looks like, or are we able to see excellence in all of its forms, including Black excellence? And so, you know, there's a lot of systemic uprooting we can do to pinpoint where exactly individual organizations can move the needle. But then I think the real power comes in, as we heard before, companies banding together in solidarity as a collective movement, putting pressure on local communities and governances and police forces to step up alongside of them in their efforts. The research is there, the will is there, the attention, I believe, is turning towards this issue, and we have to approach it as an ecosystem. You know, what happens out there is the same thing that happens within our companies, and at the same time, the movements that we make internally within the corporate sector can also reverberate back out into the municipalities in which our employees go back to their homes, go back to their, you know, sort of lives outside of work. And so I really see this as a bi-directional relationship. And I agree that the time is now.
So just very, very briefly, so do you think, is there more of a will in corporate America to make the change than the government?
It's a great question. I think that there's more levers to pull within corporate America. I think, you know, government is really slow to change. I think that sometimes we need kind of grassroots mobilization steeped in hope, as we heard before, and that corporations and businesses have a lot to flex in this space. So I think in this case, we might see that companies move faster than governances, and I think that's okay. I like the idea that governances are responding to these protests, and with the backing of the corporate sector, they'll have no choice but to kind of follow suit of their constituents.
Adjoa, what advice would you give your white colleagues when they're trying to, I guess, discuss what's going on at the moment?
That's a lot of advice.
Well, briefly, please.
Okay. So basically, I would say that, so a friend of mine always says that today one of the biggest buzzwords among the millennials is laugh out loud. But to the leaders out there, which is white colleagues, non-white colleagues, really out there, is listen, observe, and learn with a lot of humility and aggressively. And also, I think that we need to be more mindful. And so I'll give you a little bit of my experience working in the corporate world. I've had a bit of both sides. A lot of people who have helped me succeed have been white people. I've had a lot of support. But on the other side as well, I've had others who just didn't feel I deserved the position that I was in, who did everything to ensure that I was brought down. So I think what I would advise is we need to be mindful. We deal with different challenges. The Africans here, the Black people here, face a lot of challenges that the whites may not necessarily understand at all, even if you explain to them. So we need to be mindful. We need to be caring. We need to provide a platform where people's voices, so for example, forums where voices, the Africans, and even all other sort of the BEII Group voices can be heard. So that is my advice.
Okay.
And then also, lastly, to add, for those out there who have the concerns, so like the protesters, we need to be specific. We need to table out our needs. Do we want a review of current policies and regulations, either at business, in the company level or government level? Do we want harsher punishment for racial crimes? And so we need to be specific. And I believe that that is what is going to get us the change.
Adjoa in London and Erin in Chicago, we really appreciate your time, your thoughts, and of course your expertise. You take care, stay safe, and thanks for joining us once again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, come